David Miller woke up before sunrise, as he did every day. The alarm on his old phone rang at 4:45 a.m., and for a moment, he stared at the cracked ceiling of the small apartment he shared with his daughter, Lily. The building was noisy at night. The neighbors argued, the pipes rattled, and the heater barely worked in winter. But when David turned his head to look at Lily, still asleep in her little bed by the window, all of that faded away. She was only 7 years old, with golden hair that always fell in her eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She was the reason he worked 2 jobs and barely rested. She was the reason he kept going, even when the world seemed determined to push him down. David sat up slowly, his muscles aching. He had been a janitor for years, cleaning schools in the morning and offices at night. The pay was low and the hours were long, but it was honest work. He could never afford college, never had a fancy title or a big house, but he had Lily, and that was enough. As he put on his worn-out work boots, he whispered to himself, "One day, kiddo. One day things will be better." He tiptoed across the room and tucked the blanket around Lily before heading to the small kitchen. The fridge rattled when he opened it. Inside there was milk, a half loaf of bread, and a few apples. He quickly packed Lily's school lunch, a peanut butter sandwich, 1 apple, and a small juice box. It wasn't much, but Lily never complained. She always said, "Daddy, it's yummy," with her cheerful grin. By 5:30 a.m., David was already outside walking to the bus stop. The air was cold, his breath forming clouds in front of him. The city was still half asleep, the streets quiet except for the sound of buses rumbling past. David shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, thinking about the bills waiting at home. Rent was late. The electricity bill had a red warning stamp. And Lily's school had sent another letter reminding him about the unpaid field trip fee. David sighed. Life was heavy, but he carried it because he had no other choice. At the elementary school where he worked, the hallways smelled of chalk and disinfectant. David pushed his mop down the long corridor, his mind far away. Teachers greeted him politely, some with kind smiles, others with quick nods. To most, he was invisible. The man who cleaned the floors, emptied the trash, and made sure the bathrooms didn't smell. But to David, every dollar he earned was a shield protecting his daughter from hunger and despair. During lunch break, he sneaked out to call Lily's school to check if she had arrived safely. "She's here, Mr. Miller," the secretary said warmly. "She's reading a book in the corner while waiting for class. She's a bright one." David smiled. "Thank you," he whispered before hanging up. The thought of Lily sitting with a book, her legs swinging beneath her chair, gave him strength. She loved reading fairy tales, especially stories about brave knights saving kingdoms. Sometimes, she would look at him after finishing a story and say, "Daddy, you're my knight." Those words stayed with him through the longest days. That evening, David went straight to his second job at the hospital. The janitorial shift there paid slightly more, and though the hours stretched late into the night, he needed every cent. Hospitals were both quiet and chaotic, a place of healing but also of pain. As he mopped the polished floors and changed trash bags in patient rooms, he often overheard fragments of conversations. Families crying, doctors giving updates, machines beeping. It was in this hospital, though, that his life would change forever. On the 7th floor where the private rooms were, David was asked to clean a room that most of the staff tried to avoid. The patient inside was Emily Johnson, once one of the wealthiest businesswomen in the country. She had been a billionaire, the head of a global company, until a car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Since then, Emily had shut herself off from the world. She rarely spoke to nurses, dismissed doctors coldly, and refused visitors. The story of her fall from power had been in newspapers for months, but David only knew the basics. All he knew was that he needed to do his job quietly and leave. When he entered her room, he was struck by how different she looked compared to the pictures he had seen in magazines years ago. Emily had once been radiant, always in elegant dresses, smiling confidently in front of cameras. Now she sat in her wheelchair by the window, her dark hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her eyes distant. She didn't even glance at him when he said softly, "Good evening, ma'am. Just here to tidy up." David worked silently, wiping surfaces, emptying the bin, and making sure not to disturb her. But as he was about to leave, he heard her voice, low, sharp, and tired. "You don't have to pretend I'm invisible," she said. David froze for a second, then turned toward her. "I'm not pretending. I just didn't want to bother you." Emily looked at him for the first time, her gaze piercing. Everyone thinks I'm broken. They look at me with pity or they avoid me completely. But you don't even look at me, David swallowed. He wasn't sure what to say. Finally, he answered honestly, I look at you the way I look at anyone else. Just a person. That's all. For a moment, Emily studied him, as if she wasn't sure whether to be insulted or comforted. Then, surprisingly, a faint smile touched her lips. You're different, she murmured, turning her eyes back to the window. That night, when David returned home near midnight, he was exhausted. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, a book still clutched in her small hands. He carried her to bed gently, his heart swelling with love. But as he lay down on his own bed, his thoughts drifted back to Emily. He had seen pain in her eyes, the kind of pain that made someone shut the world out. It reminded him of his own dark days when he had lost his wife, Lily's mother, during childbirth. He had wanted to shut the world out too, but he couldn't. He had Lily to live for. And now he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could help someone else find a reason to live again. The next morning, David's routine repeated, but something inside him felt different. When he walked into Emily's room later that evening, she looked at him and said almost teasingly, "The janitor again?" He chuckled softly. "Yes, ma'am. Still the janitor." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and for the first time in years, David felt that maybe this wasn't just another job. Maybe fate had placed him in that room for a reason. He didn't know then how much their lives would change. The following days slipped into a quiet rhythm for David. His morning still began with the sound of his old phone alarm, his daughter Lily's sleepy smile, and the endless routine of cleaning classrooms. But something had shifted inside him. Ever since his first real conversation with Emily Johnson, he carried her face in the back of his mind, the mixture of pride and sorrow in her eyes. The way her faint smile had seemed almost like a fragile miracle. By evening, when he arrived at the hospital, he felt a strange pull toward the 7th floor. Most janitors preferred working in other wings where patients were friendlier, but David didn't mind being assigned to Emily's room. In truth, he almost looked forward to it. Emily, however, remained a mystery. Every time David entered her room, she seemed wrapped in a wall of silence. She sat near the large window, her wheelchair turned slightly toward the fading sunlight. Sometimes she read, but more often she simply stared outside, as though the city lights reminded her of a life she could no longer reach. "Good evening," David would say politely. "Still cleaning floors?" She would reply, her voice soft but edged with dry humor. And though she rarely said more, David sensed she didn't dislike his presence. Unlike the doctors and nurses, he never hovered over her or showered her with forced encouragement. He simply did his work, steady and quiet, but always respectful. One night, as David was scrubbing the corners of the room, Emily spoke again. "Why do you always smile?" she asked suddenly. David glanced up, surprised. "Do I?" "Yes," Emily said, her eyes narrowing as though studying him. "You walk in here with that calm face. You smile when you say hello. It doesn't make sense." David leaned on his mop for a moment, thinking, "Maybe because I don't have time to frown," he said with a faint chuckle. Emily tilted her head. "You clean floors for a living. You work nights, and you still smile. Are you pretending?" Her bluntness might have stung another man, but David only shook his head. "No, ma'am. I've just learned that smiling is lighter than carrying anger." For the first time, Emily held his gaze longer than a second. Something flickered in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe even respect, but she quickly looked away. That same night, as David prepared to leave, Emily asked, almost casually, "Do you have a family?" The question caught him off guard. Usually, patients never wanted to know about him. He was only the janitor, after all. "Yes," he said quietly. "I have a daughter. She's 7. Her name is Lily." Emily's expression softened, though her voice remained controlled. "And her mother?" David hesitated, then answered honestly, "She passed away the day Lily was born." Silence fell between them. Emily's eyes drifted toward the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, almost fragile. "So you've been raising her alone?" "Yes," David said. "It hasn't been easy, but Lily, she's my whole world." Emily pressed her lips together. For someone who rarely showed emotion, her face seemed to shift at his words, as though she was touched more deeply than she wanted to admit. The next evening, David brought a drawing Lily had made in school. It was a simple crayon picture of a tall man holding the hand of a little girl under a bright sun. Across the top, Lily had written in shaky letters, "Me and Daddy." David had intended to keep it in his wallet, but somehow, when he saw Emily sitting by the window again, he felt the urge to share it. "My daughter drew this," he said, holding it up as he entered. Emily raised an eyebrow but reached out. When she took the paper in her hands, she stared at it longer than David expected. Her fingers traced the uneven crayon lines. "She drew you smiling," Emily said softly. David chuckled. "She always does." Emily set the picture on her lap, and for the first time since her accident, a genuine smile tugged at her lips, not faint or forced, but real. "You're lucky," she whispered. David frowned slightly. "Lucky?" "Yes," Emily said, her voice trembling just a little. "You may not have much money. You may scrub floors, but you have someone who looks at you with love. I had all the money in the world, but—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "In the end, I was alone." David's chest tightened. He wanted to say something comforting, but he knew empty words wouldn't heal her pain. Instead, he said quietly, "You're not alone now." For a brief second, Emily's eyes glistened, but she quickly blinked away the tears. Over the next week, their conversations grew. Emily never allowed long talks, her pride kept her distant, but the small exchanges were enough. "You should sit by the window less," David told her one night. "It makes you think too much," Emily smirked. "And what should I do instead, dance?" "Maybe laugh," David said, grinning. She shook her head, but a faint laugh escaped her anyway. It was the first time David had heard it, and the sound stayed with him long after his shift ended. Still, beneath her dry humor, Emily carried deep bitterness. One evening, as David changed the bedsheets, she said suddenly, "They keep telling me therapy will help, that maybe I can recover, but they don't understand. I was powerful. I had an empire. Now look at me, a woman who can't even stand up." Her words were sharp, filled with anger and despair. David paused, looking at her seriously. "Maybe you're still powerful," he said quietly. Emily scoffed. "Powerful? I can't even take 3 steps." David set down the clean sheet and met her gaze. "Then maybe that's where it begins. With 1 step." Emily stared at him in silence, as though unsure whether to laugh at his foolishness or believe him. Finally, she let out a bitter laugh. "You're a janitor. What do you know about recovery?" David smiled faintly. "Maybe nothing. But I do know about fighting for someone you love, and I believe you can walk again." Her laughter faded, replaced by a long, searching look. For the first time, she didn't reply with sarcasm. Instead, her eyes filled with something fragile, something unspoken. And then, almost too softly to hear, she whispered, "No one has said that to me in a long time." That night, when David returned home, Lily was waiting up for him. She ran into his arms, hugging him tightly. "Daddy," she said, "you smell like hospital again." David chuckled, lifting her onto his lap. "That's because I've been helping people." "Did you help today?" she asked, her eyes wide. David thought of Emily's face, the moment when her sarcasm slipped, and hope flickered like a candle in the dark. He nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "I think I did." The hospital corridors were quiet that evening, except for the hum of machines and the occasional footsteps of nurses rushing past. David arrived for his shift with the same steady calm he always carried, but tonight something weighed on his mind. His conversation with Emily the night before had stayed with him, her bitter laugh, her broken words, and the way her eyes softened when he told her she could still be powerful. He couldn't shake the feeling that she needed more than polite conversations and a cleaned room. She needed someone to believe in her. When David entered Emily's room, she was as usual sitting by the window, her wheelchair turned slightly away from the door. The city lights glowed faintly through the glass, but her face was shadowed, as though she carried the weight of a world no one else could see. "Good evening, Miss Johnson," David said warmly, setting down his supplies. She gave a small nod, not looking at him. "Good evening, Janitor," David chuckled softly. "Still calling me that?" Emily's lips curved slightly, though she kept her gaze on the window. "What else should I call you?" "David will do," he replied. After a pause, Emily finally turned her head. Her sharp eyes studied him for a moment, then she said, "Fine. David it is." For a while, silence stretched between them. David wiped the counters, replaced the trash bag, and checked the floors. Emily remained by the window, her fingers resting against the armrest of her chair. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke. "Do you know what the world thinks of me now?" David glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "They see me as a tragedy," she said, her voice low and bitter. "The powerful billionaire who lost everything in a single accident. They whisper about me in news articles, make documentaries about my fall, and pity me when I'm not looking. To them, I'm nothing more than a broken story." Her words cut through the room, heavy with pain. David leaned on his mop, choosing his reply carefully. "And what do you see when you look at yourself?" he asked gently. Emily's jaw tightened. "I see someone who used to walk into a room and command it. Someone who signed billion-dollar contracts. Now I can't even walk to the other side of this room. I see nothing." David stepped closer, his voice firm but kind. "That's not true. I don't see nothing. I see someone who is still here. Someone who hasn't given up completely no matter what she says." Emily laughed dryly. "You think you know me after a few weeks of cleaning my room?" "No," David said honestly. "But I know what it looks like when someone wants to give up. I've been there." Emily turned sharply toward him, her eyes narrowing. "When?" David hesitated. Then he spoke quietly. "When my wife died. The day my daughter was born, I thought I couldn't go on. I wanted to close my eyes and let the world pass me by. But then I saw Lily, so small, so full of life, and I realized I had to fight for her. I had to live for her." Emily's expression softened, though her voice was still guarded. "That's different." "You had someone to fight for." David took a slow breath. Then, with a calm strength in his voice, he said, "And so do you. You have yourself." Emily's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly looked away. "You don't understand. I can't walk. My life is over." David stepped closer, his words steady and sure. "Then I'll help you walk." The room fell silent. For a moment, Emily stared at him as though he had just spoken nonsense. Then suddenly she burst out laughing. A sharp, almost bitter laugh that echoed in the quiet room. "You," she said between laughs. "You're a janitor. You clean floors. You don't even have a medical degree. And you think you can help me walk?" David didn't flinch. He didn't smile or back down. He simply met her gaze with calm determination. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'll help you walk." Her laughter faded slowly, replaced by disbelief. She searched his face for signs of a joke, but his eyes were steady, unwavering. "Do you hear yourself?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you even realize how impossible that sounds?" David nodded. "I know it sounds impossible, but I also know that sometimes the impossible only becomes possible when someone believes it can." Emily shook her head, pressing a hand to her forehead. "You're insane," maybe, David said with a faint smile. "But I'd rather be insane than let you believe your life is over." Emily fell quiet, her eyes fixed on the floor. For a long time she didn't speak. David continued cleaning, giving her space, but the air in the room felt different now. Charged, fragile, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Emily whispered, "No one's ever said that to me before. Not even the doctors. They say therapy might help, but their voices are always filled with doubt. They don't believe it, they just pretend." David looked at her seriously. "I'm not pretending." Her throat tightened, and to her own surprise, tears filled her eyes. She quickly turned her face away, wiping at them furiously. Don't say things like that. You don't know what it feels like to believe for 1 second that maybe, just maybe, I could stand again, only to fall and be reminded I can't." David's voice softened. "I do know. Not the same way, but I know what it's like to fall and feel like you'll never get up again." "But you did, Emily. You're still here. That means there's still a chance." Her hands trembled slightly on the armrest of her chair. For so long she had built walls around her heart, protecting herself from false hope. But something about David's voice, his eyes, his calm certainty, it cracked something inside her. She laughed again, but this time the sound was weak, almost broken. "You're either the kindest man I've ever met, or the cruelest." David tilted his head. "Why cruel?" "Because," she whispered, her voice shaking, "if you're wrong, I don't know if I can survive the disappointment." David walked closer, his voice steady. "Then let me carry that risk. Don't think about the disappointment. Just think about the first step. That's all." Emily stared at him, her tears shining in the dim light. She wanted to push him away, to dismiss his words as foolish. But deep inside, something stirred, a spark she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. And for the first time since her accident, Emily Johnson cried. Not from anger, not from self-pity, but from the terrifying possibility that maybe she wasn't broken forever. That night, when David returned home, Lily was already asleep, her small hand curled around her stuffed bear. David sat beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I made a promise today," he whispered. "A big one. And I don't know how I'll do it, but I have to try." He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him, but his heart felt strangely lighter. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting for something greater than himself. And though Emily had laughed at his promise, David knew the truth. Beneath her laughter were tears. And beneath those tears was a fragile hope. And hope, he believed, was the first step toward walking again. The morning sun filtered through the thin hospital curtains, painting the room in soft golden light. Emily sat in her wheelchair, staring at the faint glow. She had hardly slept. The janitor's words still echoed in her mind. "I'll help you walk." It sounded foolish, impossible. Yet somehow it had shaken her heart more deeply than anything the doctors had said in 2 years. They spoke of exercises, medications, and probabilities. But David had spoken with certainty. His belief had no charts or medical terms. It was simple, raw, and real, and that scared her. When David walked in later that evening, his face calm as always, Emily turned toward him quickly. "Why did you say that?" she demanded. David placed his cleaning supplies down and met her eyes. "Because I meant it." "You can't just say something like that," she snapped. "Do you realize what hope does to a person like me? It builds you up only to crush you." David didn't argue. He simply nodded as though he understood. "You're right. Hope can hurt, but without it we stop living." "I don't want you to stop living." Emily blinked at him, her heart tightening. No one had spoken to her like that in years. That weekend, David brought Lily with him to the hospital. He had no one to watch her, and though he worried Emily might not appreciate the company, he had no choice. As soon as Lily entered the room, her curious eyes widened. "Daddy, is this your friend?" she asked, pointing at Emily. David hesitated. "Yes," he said softly. "This is Ms. Johnson." Emily raised her brows, surprised by the word friend. She had not thought of herself as anyone's friend in a very long time. Lily walked closer, holding a small book with colorful pages. "Do you like stories?" she asked innocently. Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Stories?" "Yes," Lily said eagerly, flipping the book open. "Daddy reads me fairy tales every night. Do you want me to read to you?" David almost interrupted, worried Emily might refuse, but to his surprise, Emily gave a small nod. And so, Lily climbed onto the chair beside the bed and began to read, her little voice filling the room with warmth. For the first time in months, Emily felt something stir inside her chest. It wasn't laughter, it wasn't tears, it was gentleness. From that day on, things slowly began to change. When David came to clean, he would sometimes guide Emily through tiny exercises, stretching her arms, straightening her back, adjusting her posture. At first she resisted. "This is pointless," she muttered. "Maybe," David replied, steady as ever. "But let's try." Gradually she gave in. Her pride told her it was foolish, but his calm persistence wore down her walls. She began to lift her arms more, twist her torso slightly, and shift her weight forward. Small, almost invisible progress, but progress nonetheless. "Why are you doing this?" Emily asked one night, sweat beading her forehead after a short exercise. David smiled faintly. "Because I promised." One evening, while David was helping Emily adjust her legs with the therapist's bands, Lily entered quietly. She had finished her homework in the waiting area and wanted to see her father. When she saw Emily struggling, Lily ran over. "You can do it," she said cheerfully, clapping her small hands. Emily froze. The words struck her like lightning. "You can do it." They were words she had once told her employees, her younger cousins, even herself. But now they came from a child, David's little girl, with such innocent faith that Emily's throat tightened. Her body shook, her muscles trembled, but she pushed harder. And though she didn't succeed fully, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: determination. When the exercise ended, Emily leaned back in her wheelchair, exhausted. Lily patted her hand gently. See? You're strong. Emily's lips trembled. Slowly, she nodded. Over the following weeks, a new rhythm formed. David cleaned, Emily tried her exercises, and Lily sometimes joined with drawings or stories. The once cold hospital room began to feel less like a cage and more like a place of fragile beginnings. Nurses noticed the change. They whispered in the halls about how Emily Johnson was finally engaging again. Doctors raised their brows at her improved posture and increased participation. But Emily herself was the most surprised. She found herself waiting for David's visits, listening for the soft sound of his mop against the floor, the warm tone of his voice as he encouraged her. One night, she said quietly, "You're not like other people here. You don't see me as broken." David looked at her, his expression gentle. "That's because you're not broken. You're just healing." Her eyes glistened, but she quickly looked away. Yet progress wasn't without struggle. There were days when Emily felt strong, pushing herself further than before. But there were also days when pain consumed her, when her legs refused to respond, when exhaustion crushed her spirit. On one such night, after failing to lift herself even an inch, Emily slammed her fist against the armrest. "It's useless," she shouted. "I'll never walk again." David stayed calm, kneeling beside her. "It's not useless. You're trying. That matters. I'm tired of trying," she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm tired of failing. I used to conquer boardrooms. Now I can't conquer my own body." David's voice softened almost like a whisper. "Failure isn't the opposite of progress, Emily. It's part of it." Her breathing was ragged, her heart aching. But when she looked at him, steady, patient, unshaken, she felt something steady inside herself too. Slowly she whispered, "Why don't you give up on me?" David met her gaze. "Because my daughter never gave up on me, and I won't give up on you." Her tears fell freely then, not of anger but of release. That night after David left, Emily sat alone in her room, staring at the city lights. For the first time in years, she whispered aloud to herself, "Maybe, just maybe." The sound of her own hope startled her, but she didn't take it back. Back at home, David tucked Lily into bed. She looked up at him with her wide, bright eyes and asked, "Daddy, is Ms. Johnson getting better?" David smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Slowly, but she is." Lily hugged her bear tightly. "That's because you help her." David shook his head gently. "No, Lily. That's because she's stronger than she knows." But deep inside, he knew the truth. It wasn't just his encouragement. It was the way Lily's innocence and kindness had touched Emily's heart. His daughter was breaking through walls he alone could never reach, and for the first time, David allowed himself to dream. Maybe Emily really could take that first step. The hospital's therapy room was filled with silence that morning. The large windows allowed the sunlight to fall across the shiny floor, but the mood inside was heavy. Emily sat in her wheelchair, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her face pale and drawn. She had refused to try the exercises that day. David entered quietly, holding a mop in his hand. He wasn't on duty to help her, at least not officially, but he had made it his mission to be there every time therapy was scheduled. He leaned the mop against the wall and sat down across from her. "You're not even going to try today?" he asked gently. Emily avoided his eyes. "What's the point?" "I'll fail again. I'll embarrass myself again. I don't want to keep pretending that something is possible when it isn't." Her voice trembled, and even though she tried to sound strong, there was deep sadness hidden behind those words. David leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "Emily, do you think my little girl would be able to tie her shoes if she gave up the first time she fell over? Do you think she'd be reading her favorite books if she had quit after the first mistake?" Emily's lips tightened. "This isn't about tying shoes, David. This is about my body. My legs don't work, and I'm tired of hoping for something that may never happen." For the first time since meeting her, David felt her walls crack a little more. She wasn't angry now. She was broken. He wanted to reach across and take her hand, but he knew she valued her independence too much. Instead, he spoke softly. "You're right. This isn't easy, but you know what? You're still here. And if you're still here, then there's still a chance. Maybe it's 1 in 100, maybe 1 in 1,000, but it's still there. And I believe in it." Emily let out a short laugh, but it wasn't out of joy. It was full of pain. "Believe? Belief doesn't make legs move." David smiled sadly. Maybe not. But belief keeps us trying. And trying. That's the only way change ever happens. For a long moment, they both sat in silence. The sunlight touched Emily's hair, making her look less like the cold billionaire everyone used to fear, and more like a woman who had carried too many burdens. Her eyes grew wet, and finally, tears slid down her cheeks. She quickly turned her face away, embarrassed. David stood and handed her a tissue. Crying isn't weakness, Emily. It's proof that you're still fighting inside. She hesitated, then took the tissue. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears. You don't understand. Before the accident, I was in control of everything. I gave orders and people listened. Now I can't even tell my own body to take a single step. Do you know how humiliating that feels? David's eyes softened. I don't know your world, Emily. I've never been a billionaire, never been in control of empires. But I know what it's like to feel helpless. I lost my wife. I became a janitor when I wanted to give my daughter more. I've seen nights when I couldn't even afford her favorite meal. I know what it's like to feel small. But you know what kept me going? Her smile. And the thought that tomorrow could be better than today. Emily looked at him then, really looked. His eyes weren't filled with pity, but with something far stronger, faith. The kind of faith that could move mountains even when it seemed impossible. Her lips trembled. What if I try again and fail? David gave a half smile. Then we'll try again tomorrow. And the next day. And the next. Until one day failure turns into progress. That's how life works. For the first time in weeks, Emily let herself lean into the hope he carried. She nodded slowly, whispering, Okay. The therapist entered the room, surprised to see Emily readying herself. David stepped back but stayed close enough to encourage her. With help, Emily gripped the parallel bars. Her arms shook as she tried to push herself upward. Sweat gathered on her forehead, and every second looked like a battle. Breathe, David said calmly, one step at a time. Emily clenched her jaw and moved 1 foot forward. It was shaky, almost nothing, but it was still movement. Her heart raced, and for a moment she felt both terrified and alive. She looked at David, who was watching her with a proud smile, and something inside her shifted. Her second step came after a painful pause. Then a third. She collapsed back into the wheelchair after that, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her cheeks. David clapped his hands once. That was incredible. Emily shook her head, crying harder now. That was pathetic. 3 steps, that's all I could do. He knelt in front of her, his voice firm but kind. No, that was victory. Today it's 3. Tomorrow it'll be 4. And one day, Emily, you'll surprise yourself. Don't measure yourself against who you used to be. Measure yourself against who you were yesterday. Her tears kept falling, but this time they weren't from defeat. They were from something else. Hope mixed with fear, but still hope. She laughed through her sobs and whispered, You're impossible, David. He chuckled. Maybe, but I told you, I'll help you walk. And I'm not going anywhere. That day marked a turning point. The walls Emily had built around her heart began to crumble. She still had doubts, but she also had a partner in her fight. David became more than a janitor in her eyes. He became a reason to believe again. At night, when she sat alone in her hospital room, she thought about the way his daughter smiled at her and the way David spoke as if tomorrow really could be brighter. Slowly, her laughter returned, though often mixed with tears. She found herself waiting for his visits, eager to hear his encouraging words. Afraid of losing the warmth he brought with him. And though Emily didn't say it out loud, deep inside she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life wasn't over. Maybe it was only beginning. The morning sunlight poured into the hospital room, touching everything with a soft warmth. Emily sat by the window, her legs dangling slightly over the edge of the wheelchair. Today felt different. There was a quiet determination in her eyes, one that had been absent for a long time. She remembered the first day she met David, the janitor who had dared to speak hope into her broken life. She had laughed at him then, but now she felt something stronger than fear or doubt. David entered quietly, carrying his cleaning supplies. He paused at the doorway, smiling when he saw Emily. She returned the smile, small but genuine. Good morning, he said softly. Good morning, Emily replied, her voice steady. There was no bitterness today, only focus. Ready for practice? David asked, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. Emily nodded. I think I am. Lily ran into the room shortly after, holding a small stuffed bear in her hands. Daddy, I brought Mr. Snuggles to watch Emily today. she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. David chuckled, ruffling her hair. Thank you, sweetheart. I think Emily could use a little encouragement. Emily smiled at Lily. I'll try my best, little one, she said. The warmth in her voice made David's heart lift. The therapy session began slowly. David guided Emily to stand near the parallel bars. Her legs shook and her arms clutched the bars tightly. Sweat formed on her forehead, but she refused to let her fear stop her. Take it slow, David said. One step at a time. Emily nodded and pushed herself forward inch by inch. The first few steps were shaky and she stumbled slightly, but David caught her gently. You're doing it, he said. You're really doing it. Lily clapped her hands. Go, Emily. You can do it. Something inside Emily shifted. The warmth of encouragement, the faith in her heart, and the steady support from David combined into a strength she had not known she possessed. Step by step, she moved forward, her determination shining through. When she reached the end of the parallel bars, she paused, breathing heavily but smiling. I did it, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. David knelt in front of her, his own eyes glistening. Yes, you did. And tomorrow you'll do even more. Over the next few weeks, Emily's progress accelerated. David remained by her side during every session, guiding her, encouraging her, and believing in her when she doubted herself. Lily often joined, her small presence reminding Emily of the innocence and hope that still existed in the world. One afternoon, as Emily took her first unsupported steps in the therapy room, David and Lily cheered loudly. Nurses and doctors who had watched her progress quietly from the doorway were astonished at the transformation. Emily's laughter filled the room, a sound so pure and joyful that even the walls seemed to smile. When she finally sat down, exhausted but elated, she turned to David. I couldn't have done this without you, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. David shook his head. You did this yourself, Emily. I only held your hand while you found your own strength. Emily looked at Lily, then back at David, tears rolling down her cheeks. I don't even know how to thank you, David smiled softly. Keep walking. That's thanks enough. That evening, after the hospital lights dimmed and the corridors emptied, Emily sat quietly in her room. For the first time in years, she felt a peace she had not known. Her body still trembled with weakness, but her spirit soared. She thought about her life before the accident, the power, the money, the fame, and realized that none of it mattered as much as this: life, connection, and hope. David entered the room one last time that night before heading home. He sat beside her wheelchair, gently resting his hand on hers. You've come so far, he said. I'm proud of you. Emily's lips curved into a soft smile. I never thought I'd see this day, she whispered. I laughed when you said you'd help me walk. But now I see that you were right. Hope wasn't a lie. David squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes hope is all we have, and sometimes it's enough to change everything. Emily looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper, a connection that neither of them fully understood but both felt. Thank you, David, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You never stopped trying, David said softly. You believed too. That's what made this possible. The following morning, Emily decided to take her first independent steps outside the therapy room. David and Lily walked beside her, supporting her with encouragement rather than holding her up. The sunlight on her face felt warm, almost like a promise. Step by step, she moved forward, each one stronger than the last. When she reached the hospital garden, a quiet breeze brushed her hair. She stood for a moment, taking in the fresh air and the view of trees swaying gently in the wind. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of triumph. David knelt beside her, smiling. Look at you, he said. You did it. You're walking. Emily laughed, the sound echoing across the garden. I really am, she said. I really am. Lily hugged her tightly. You're amazing, Emily. Emily looked at the little girl and then at David. You both changed my life, she whispered. David shook his head, smiling. No, you changed your life. We only walked beside you. Days turned into weeks and Emily continued to improve. She began taking small walks around the hospital, gradually increasing her stamina. Her confidence grew, and with it a newfound joy in life. She spoke more with the nurses, laughed more freely, and even started sharing small parts of her story with others. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Emily stood outside the hospital, leaning on a cane for support. David and Lily watched her, smiling proudly. "Look at you," David said softly, standing tall, stronger than ever. Emily turned to him, tears in her eyes but a radiant smile on her face. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said. "I thought my life was over, but now I see that this is only the beginning." Lily hugged her again. "You're my hero," she exclaimed. Emily laughed, her heart full. "No, Lily, you are my hero too. You reminded me that even small hearts can carry big hope."